The BMW S1000RR is one of those bikes that enjoys a rare status among the pantheon of bikes discussed on the internet. It's a benchmark bike that people are fascinated with, obsessed with even. It's the sort of machine that leaves thousands of teenage boys drooling over its video game-like performance. The S1000 is the GTR of motorcycles. It's seen as clinical, calculated, and devoid of a soul. A lifeless machine that's built strictly to destroy lap times and do nothing else. And that's for good reason. With 179 horsepower at the rear wheel in stock form, it is one of, if not the most powerful production leader bike currently on sale. BMW is lucky the Turbo Busa was discontinued. It's a trope that's seen with German machines, how they're built with precision, excellence, and relegated to corporate duties like a BMW 3 Series that a young executive owns while he drives to the local strip club after a long week's work. The BMW won't judge you, it won't remind you of how you promised mother not to give in to such worldly temptations. It will trudge along and perform exactly as you need it to do, every time. My name is Yammie Noob, and today we're walking through everything that is wrong with the BMW S1000RR. We'll be covering why the S1000 is a hard bike to fall in love with, what it means to become attached to objects like motorcycles, and what that says about us as riders. So buckle up, strap in, maybe pour yourself a nice cup of coffee, because this is that primo A1 content you've come to know and love from your dude, Yammie Cube. I think it's important to understand context when discussing any motorcycle, so let's look at a brief history of this bike and how it came to be. BMW has a massive history of manufacturing motorcycles and cars and all kinds of stuff, and I couldn't possibly cover all of that in this entire video, but we can look at the S1000. Surprisingly, this bike came into existence in 2009. That's kind of early, as BMW prepped a motorcycle for Superbike World Championship. They made 1,000 of these first runs to satisfy homologation and then expanded the production into the later years. It's interesting to think BMW chose to start producing a superbike in the midst of a worldwide recession, as most motorcycle sales plummeted. So the BMW quite literally comes from a racing first pedigree, where the only thing that mattered was the fastest lap time possible, and selling the bike was a secondary consideration. BMW was the first to introduce ABS and dynamic traction control on a road-going bike, signaling their innovation in the segment. So from the get-go, it was a bike that was all about the performance and nothing else. This tells us a lot about the type of product BMW was attempting to build, and in my opinion it tells us a lot about the type of person that would buy this bike too. It's not someone looking for passion like a Panigale owner or heritage like a GSXR owner, but it might be a guy or gal who's wanting the utmost performance, the pinnacle of the leader bike class, even if it means riding something that feels a little bit cold. Unlike my Ninja 400 video, I've actually ridden the S1000RR, both a 2010 and a 2015, covering both generations of the squinty-eyed leader bike. And while it is a monstrously fast bike, and I'm talking light speed acceleration, wow, holy fuck! I couldn't help but feel that it had something missing, a certain je ne sais quoi that I've found with nearly every other bike I've ridden. Now, I understand that might seem unfair to S1000 owners, but I thought it would be relevant to include in this video. It's interesting to think about how one bike made me feel very little, but it inspires its owners with love and devotion. So what is it about physical things that make us fall in love with them? Usually in Western culture, despite how ludicrously materialistic we are, loving a physical object is seen as kind of immoral. It's a moral failing to care about a physical thing, because if we were truly ascendant, we wouldn't care about physical objects and instead would focus on relationships and people. My initial thoughts on why we can learn to love physical objects is they have flaws, they are imperfect, and in that imperfection, they remind us of ourselves. Anything that's too perfect, too reliable, it begins to feel too much like an appliance to us. But when we have something that requires a little work, is a little temperamental, we can learn to love it, becoming extremely attached to it. But there's more to it than that. There's actually two types of materialism. Dr. Miele Sizek-Smetten, I'm not even going to try that one. Dr. Miele C. describes terminal materialism as the kind that's shallow and empty, wanting things for the sake of wanting them. Think big houses or supercars, unless there's a specific kind you've always aspired towards. Then there's instrumental materialism, which I think is much more interesting. This describes when an object is a bridge to another person or another feeling. I can think of quite a few examples of terminal materialism in my own life, but there's a few items that take their place as instrumental materialism in my own heart. Like an old shift knob that I keep from a 350Z that I owned. There's nothing particularly special about this old shift knob, quite the contrary. It's actually really ratty and kind of disgusting. The previous owner, I think, wore some kind of big ring and he wore it down. I had a 2003 350Z a few years back, and it was the first car that I truly fell in love with. It taught me a lot about driving, doing skids, and being a hoon, but most of all, it reminds me of a time and place in my life in the past, hanging out late at night with my friends, cracking jokes, and not having a care in the world. It's not an object I grab every morning and religiously pray to, but when it catches my eye when I walk past it, it makes me smile. And in a similar vein, it's like the cracked dash from my first Daytona. It reminds me of all the awesome times I had with it, but it also reminds me of my own mortality, how I'm not some infallible, immortal person, even though there was a period in my life where I truly did believe that. These are cherished items I would never part with, and if my house was burning down, they'd be some of the few things that I'd rush to grab. That's what makes things special. Beyond their utility, they have this quality of holding meaning that people ascribe to them. They become significant because of the stories they can tell. Things embody goals, make skills manifest, and shape the identities of their users, wrote Dr. C. and Eugene Rochberg-Halton in the 1981 book The Meaning of Things. Man is not only Homo sapiens, he is also Homo faber, the maker and user of objects, his self to a large extent a reflection of things with which he interacts. This is why I think we form bonds with objects we have to wrench on or fix. When you actually get your hands on a bike, when you will it back to life by fixing it, it seems more alive. I think that's the problem the S1000 suffers from too when we say it doesn't have character, that it's cold, it's that it doesn't feel alive. It's got an electronic throttle, traction control, etc. It just ends up feeling a bit appliance-like. One of the sweetest little bikes I've ever ridden was an RVF 400 in Brisbane, Australia. It's a 90s mini super sport with a V4 engine, carburetors, and a cable-actuated throttle. And it just felt so good. It felt so visceral, intimate, and exciting. And even though in that same trip I rode an S1000RR, I had more fun on the RVF. The idea of items being an extension of yourself goes much further back than late 20th century philosophy. Dr. Russell Belk was particularly interested in this idea of the extended self. He wrote, "It seems an inescapable fact of modern life that we learn, define, and remind ourselves of who we are by our possessions. We often say that with motorcycle riding, the bike is an extension of you. When you lean over with it, when you push slightly on the bars, you become part of that bike. Jinba Itai, which is the Japanese 4-character compound, which means horse and rider as one, feels to me like an ancient version of the melding of man and machine. The concept that man can become greater than himself by working with objects, or horses in this case, is nothing new. Going further, it's even possible to have a version of the extended self with objects you don't own yet, but you want to. Dr. Mariam Afshar writes about a pre-ownership engagement with objects, saying that people associate themselves with what they are going to have before they own it, which feeds into my last video on motovlogging about how motorcycles are aspirational things. People can form real and meaningful attachment with objects they've never owned before, particularly in today's world with so much high-definition video content available to all of us. Dr. Afshar continues by saying that when people have close relationships with objects, it can be tough to parse what is me and what is mine. Jinba Itai, horse and rider, as one. But when people have too much attachment to objects, it kind of means that they're a hoarder. So like a lot of things in life, too much of anything is never good. Tying this all back to the S1000RR, while it might appear on the surface to be a cold and lifeless machine built solely to annihilate the track, your love of an object is ultimately what it means to you. Maybe your dad rode a BMW back in the day, so every time you see that badge, you're reminded of him and how some things never change. Or maybe you promised yourself when you were a kid that one day you'd own that sweet motorcycle you saw out of the window of a car. Or maybe you're like me and you stumbled across a gorgeous 3-cylinder sport bike from Triumph and was bitten by the bug of pre-ownership right then and there. Objects can't inherently have meaning. We need to ascribe meaning to them. And bikes have a very interesting quality of being these objects that we not only use like a good knife or maybe your favorite pen, they're quite literally able to take us to new places, give us new experiences, and allow us to be as connected to them as possible. They're like musical instruments in that way, at least to me. They have the capacity to transport us and give us transformative experiences. Some go about it in a temperamental and fickle sort of way, like an old school cafe racer reminding us of a cantankerous cat or maybe a lovable yet annoying uncle, and others go about it by being reliable, dependable, amazing machines that make us smile every time because of how well built they are. So, spoiler alert, there's nothing actually wrong with the S1000RR, and if you think there is, then just ride another bike that makes you actually feel something. Thanks for checking out this video, guys. What do you think? Is the S1000RR a cold machine? Lifeless? Do you love it? Let me know in the comment section below. This is a new format I'm piloting as a part of a series of videos on motorcycle culture, and because I've always wanted to take a crack at video essays, since I don't really think anyone in the motorcycle world is really doing this as far as I'm aware. I'm not much of a writer. My background is in economics, data, marketing, music, and those kinds of things, so excuse any terrible syntax or excessive usage of run-on sentences, like this one. The big upside is that you guys get to hear my voice and not read my actual words, since it's laden with commas and dashes. Anyways, I'll catch you guys next time. See you later. Fact: Yammie has heard your cries to create a video about A2 license restrictions for Euro bros. And while I live in Freedomville, US of A, and I don't understand why you can't just buy a Turbo Busa as your first bike, I will do my best and work that into the Yammie master content schedule, aka my brain. Goodbye.